Okay, good morning and afternoon, everyone. My name is Charles Fisher Post, Associate Director here in the Good Jobs Innovation Lab at Pacific Community Ventures. And I'm so excited to kick off the third in our three-part webinar series around designing high-impact place-based loan funds for small businesses. The webinar series is based on a playbook PCV has created out of our experiences launching the 0% Oakland Restorative Loan Fund during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that playbook is going to be published this fall. Pacific Community Ventures is a 501c3 nonprofit impact investing and community development financial institution. Among the recipients of PCV's integrated Loan Plus Advice product are 37 small business owners operating businesses in Oakland's most underinvested areas. They each received 0% interest, no fee loans from PCV through our $2.5 million Oakland Restorative Loan Fund. Today's webinar will focus on strategies for using data to deploy Catalytic capital to neighborhoods where it will have the highest impact. This reflects PCV's approach to reaching entrepreneurs of color operating businesses in some of Oakland's lowest income, most historically underestimated neighborhoods. And just a few reminders before we start the program. So a member of PCV's team is monitoring the chat for any questions that you may have that may arise during the presentation. And we're going to have a dedicated time for Q&A at the end of the presentation to answer all the questions that come up. So please do share, any questions you have, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll address them at the end there. Please do remember to place yourself on mute while our speakers are presenting. And the webinar is being recorded and it may be distributed publicly. So by your participation, you're agreeing to your contributions being recorded. And should you experience any technical challenges during this webinar, please contact Beverly Zambrano. Her email is on the slide here, or feel free to drop any issues you're experiencing in the chat, and someone from our team will reach out. So thank you for that. Now, of course, this playbook and webinar series would not have been possible without the support from the MacArthur Foundation, Mid-Yard Network, and the Rockefeller Foundation through their support of the Catalytic Capital Consortium grant-making program, a project of the New Venture Fund. We appreciate their contributions and the participation of the Fostering Solutions and Infrastructure cohort, as well as the contributions of all of the Good Jobs Innovation Lab's founding sponsors. We're thankful for the support from UCSF and Starbucks. Their investments capitalize the Oakland Fund. And we're also thankful for grant support from GoFundMe, the City Foundation, Bank of America, and Battery Powered, which allowed us to provide those no-fee loans at 0% interest for our Oakland Fund recipients. And of course, we appreciate the support of community partners with whom we co-created the Oakland Restorative Loan Fund. So these include the Black Cultural Zone, ESO Ventures, Feed the Hunger Fund, the Oakland Black Business Fund, the Oakland Chinatown Chamber of Commerce, and the Unity Council. And of course, we further honor the resilient entrepreneurs who generously shared their time and stories with us in the crafting of the playbook. And just a reminder, before we get started with today's program, we will be hosting an event on November 11th this year to celebrate our 25 years of supporting small business owners. Everything at the event will be sourced from Oakland area entrepreneurs and partners. So attending that event will really allow you to have an opportunity to really feel what it's like to be part of the community that we're supporting through our work. So tickets are going to go on sale for the event starting this Saturday, August 26th. So look for details in PCV's newsletter and go ahead and get your tickets. So today's webinar is the third in a three-part series around today's webinar is about leveraging data resources to design a place-based loan fund as we based on our experience with the Oakland Fund. 2 weeks ago, PCV's president and CEO, Bulbul Gupta, led our webinar on community engagement and how we co-created the Oakland Fund alongside 6 community partners. And then last week, PCV's managing director of small business lending, Bob Porter, led a webinar on how we structured capital in order to be able to create our $2.5 million fund. So both of these webinars are available on our YouTube channel, and they're also linked in the email communications about today's webinar. So we invite you to definitely check those out. If you were not able to join live at the time. And of course, this webinar as well will be available on that channel. Joining us today to share about PCV's impact optimization strategy, as modeled by our Oakland Fund, is PCV's Manager of Data and Analytics, Kenneth Kitahata, as well as PCV Credit Analyst, Alberto Enriquez. And just a quick overview of what we plan to cover today. So first, Alberto is going to provide some background on the Oakland Restorative Loan Fund, including why we chose to launch in Oakland and who we ended up serving. Then Ken will take us through the data analytics and impact optimization strategies that PCV employed in the design and implementation of our Oakland Fund. Eleanor Bolai, PCV's Associate Director of Corporate and Community Partnerships, will then open it up to questions and question time and engage you all with some discussion questions related to our data analytics and impact optimization. With that, I will turn it over to Alberto Enriquez to share about our Oakland Restorative Loan Fund.
Thank you, Charles. With economic and health crisis falling hard on Oakland as the pandemic extended into 2021, PCV identified place-based investment as critical to stabilizing Oakland's most vulnerable and underestimated entrepreneurs. The intention of what became the 0% Oakland Restorative Loan Fund was in response to small business ecosystem that has consistently failed to support entrepreneurs of color in accessing the capital and resources they need. Underinvestment continues to make it difficult for entrepreneurs of color to meet lending requirements as for mortgages, student loans, car loans, and credit card loans. The financial instruments that traditional lenders use in their financial decisions have often been kept unaffordable and inaccessible to these communities. Furthermore, beyond structural barriers, PCV is learning more and more about sociological fear and trust barriers that are widespread throughout the communities it serves. Thus, the small business owner who needs access to patient and affordable capital are often not receiving it fully, even when it is offered by the community organizations they trust most. For more information on how we co-developed the fund with 6 other local Black and Brown-led community partners to try to overcome these barriers, I invite you to check out the first webinar in our Oakland Fund series around community engagement. As a result of the Oakland Restorative Loan Fund, PCV deployed $2.5 million in no-fee 0% loans to 37 small businesses across a variety of industries: retail shops, restaurants, child daycare, and other professional services. 100% of the Oakland Fund recipients are entrepreneurs of color, while 54% identified as women and 96% run businesses within historically red-line communities. PCV did not need to adjust its underwriting to originate or fund Oakland 0% loans, despite a perception among some lenders that operating in the neighborhoods PCV supported with this fund requires some type of special underwriting. Furthermore, since the official close of the fund, Oakland Fund loans have consistently outperformed the portfolio overall when looking at on-time payments as well as late payments. As someone that has underwritten many applications, the Oakland 0% loan fund, the Oakland 0% loans were always special to me. My very first application I was assigned was a business called Mannequin Madness, who applied for an Oakland 0% loan. It took a little bit of time to get all documents together necessary to underwrite the loan, but we intentionally reserved funds rather than dispersing the money to whoever could submit complete paperwork the fastest, as this was critical to the impact we aimed to have with the fund. I was very happy when we approved the application, knowing that my very first application was a success. That happiness increased when I met Mannequin Madness' owner, Judy, in person at a PCV event. I introduced myself to Judy and I told her that I underwrote the application. She embraced me like we were old friends, and that was the moment I realized what this loan meant to folks who applied for the Oakland 0% loan. Throughout the life cycle of the loan fund, I loved reading and hearing reactions of business owners who were in disbelief that a 0% loan product such as this existed. Moments like these often happen when business owners would apply for a different PCV loan product, and I would let them know that they were eligible for an Oakland 0% loan. Although the Oakland 0% loan fund has closed, many small business owners that currently have a loan with us, or even folks that don't have a relationship with PCV, reach out to me and ask, how can I apply for the Oakland 0% loan? When will it come back? And if there are plans to offer 0% loans in other cities. And now for details around how PCV was able to leverage data analytics alongside community partner input in order to optimize the impact of our Oakland Restorative Loan Fund, I will pass it to PCV's Manager of Data and Analytics, Kenneth Kitahata.
Thanks so much, Alberto. No matter how many times I hear you tell that story, I just love hearing your reflection of working with our borrowers. So thank you to PCV and to C3 for having me here. My name is Kenneth Kitahata, PCV's Manager of Data and Analytics. And again, this is our third webinar in the series, and today I'll be talking about the Oakland Fund through the lens of impact optimization. So how we use data for an evidence-based and equitable approach to choosing the neighborhoods in this fund, and also long-term impact measurement to track towards our wealth building outcomes. So first, I just wanted to start with giving a background on PCV's own data journey, because impact optimization began before the launch of the Oakland Fund in 2021. This was really a years-long effort to build towards a data-driven culture at PCV. And this is something that some of you in the audience may relate to. I think PCV, as an impact-driven CDFI, was always a mission-driven organization, but not necessarily a data-driven organization. And so we embarked on a years-long digital transformation, and this included sunsetting some of our legacy tools, migrating to a modern data stack, and driving towards a self-serve data culture. And this really started with lots of discovery among our stakeholders, and including this data maturity diagram that you're looking at now. And so this is a screenshot of a simplified exercise that I ran our team through using Figma, and I think it's something I'm happy to share with folks after the call. And we started with the problem statement of how do we create a data-driven culture at PCV. On the x-axis, you see difficulty. So in the private company, this might be investment of staff time or money for PCV. And then on the y-axis, you see value. So this might be business impact. For us, this is driving towards our mission, which is closing the wealth gap. And then you see these 4 buckets in blue that represent different stages of an organization. So at the beginning, this bucket of having no data. So maybe you're relying on hunches to make decision-making. It's difficult to track goals. Poor data quality leads to low trust. Moving one stage up, this might be where a lot of organizations are. This is descriptive analytics. So what happened? Maybe you have KPI dashboards, maybe some pattern analysis. And then going one step up, it's predictive analytics. So why did something happen? This might be some root cause analysis or regressions to control for different variables. And then at the top, that sort of most advanced level is prescriptive analytics. So how can I make something happen? So this could be an automatic trigger in your system to enable a better user experience. And so this is the exercise we ran through. And our team did 2 things to start. So first, we circled the area, where are we now? So where is our current state? Then we circled a second area of where do we want to be? What is our ideal state? And then we outlined what are the gaps to get there. So given our pain points, what are some of the things we want to see from our program team to get to that ideal state? Just as an example, I think we placed ourselves just around the descriptive area when we first did this exercise. And one of the gaps was creating a self-serve data culture where all of our staff could ask questions and have equal access to answers. And that's one of the reasons we implemented Tableau as our org-wide data visualization tool. And a great outcome metric, now 90% of our staff are active in Tableau. 90% of our staff are active in Tableau. So that's just really great to see there. And something I'll share underlying all of this is our internal data revamp working group really helped this entire process. So we have a 10-member group of stakeholders. This includes directors from across our program teams, across our operation teams, that gathers monthly to have a forum of different data and tech-related needs. So for instance, creating user stories for this data revamp that you see. It included recently adopting an AI policy guide for our entire organization. So we're continuing to leverage this group of stakeholders. And so when Bob and Bulbul came to me with questions around mapping analytics, questions around identifying neighborhoods, and questions around how do we measure long-term impact, I knew we had the internal infrastructure to support this. And so next, I'm curious in this group what role data plays in your organization. So maybe more resistant, comfortable, pretty resilient. And so we wanted to make this interactive with a poll question. We wanted to ask the group, for you, how comfortable is your organization using data in decision-making? And thank you to the team. We'll launch the poll now, and no wrong answers. This is a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being least comfortable, 3 kind of neutral, and then 5 at the top. Go ahead and answer for yourself or your organization. And we'll give you guys a few seconds here. And this is something that I'm really curious about as a data person at an impact-driven CDFI, who's interested in tech for good, and I think wanting more spaces to talk about tech and impact. So yeah, I'll give you folks a few more seconds. Okay, I think if everyone has the chance to vote, close it out. Share the results here. Yeah, okay. So it looks like a big group in 4, and then showing pretty comfortable using data in your day-to-day decision-making, and then another group in 3. Yeah, so it seems like a pretty data comfortable group here. Yeah, that's really exciting. I asked this question because there was a study among nonprofits by TechSoup, and they found that 90% of organizations collect data, only 5% use it for decision-making. So again, 90% of orgs collect data, only 5% use it in decisions. And that was really striking to me. And I think one of my North Stars in our internal infrastructure and moving us from data to insights to action. And I think it underlined a lot of PCV's push for a modern data stack, our digital transformation, and really what drove our impact in the Oakland Fund. So thank you for your answers. And now we'll turn to the Oakland Fund. So through the lens of data and analytics. And one thing I want to start with is one theme from our CEO Bulbul's webinar was restorative. And restorative for me in the terms of data analytics means how do we design with an evidence-based and equitable approach to target the most underestimated entrepreneurs and to measure outcomes towards closing the wealth gap. So that was sort of my thesis behind this presentation. And in reflecting on what I wanted to share, one question I asked myself was, how would the Oakland Fund be different if there was no data team? And one key word that popped up among some of our directors when I asked this question was generic. The Oakland Fund would have been generic, where there wouldn't have been a focus on neighborhoods, on communities, or on demographics. And that's really where mapping data came in. It allowed us to determine some of the most highest need areas in Oakland that we wanted to deploy this 0% capital. And next, we want to talk about neighborhoods. So using data allowed us to identify 5 key neighborhoods in Oakland that we'll show on a little bit later in this presentation that were the most displaced, most underestimated. And it also allowed us to see, tying back to another theme in our community engagement webinar, that we had community partners in these 5 neighborhoods that overlapped, that we could build on that trust to get past the fear and trust barrier that we often see in our entrepreneurs. Also, we'll talk about pipeline management. This fund was oversubscribed in the first couple of days. So there was a huge demand for capital, and building in some automatic processes into our application process to allow our credit analysts to easily check eligibility, I think was really helpful. And then finally, we'll talk about redlining. So I think without data analytics, we wouldn't have had the confidence to say that this fund was in fact anti-displacement in the most historically redlined areas. And we have a great chart later on that I'm excited to show. And also allowing us to tie in some of our post-closing data. So our annual impact survey that we deploy once a year, that we can track wealth building and job creation outcomes that we hope for in our theory of change. So in summary, target marketing and impact measurement, those were sort of our 2 keys here. So ahead of our Oakland Fund launch in 2021, the question I got from our leadership team was, what's possible? So what's possible in making sure our capital goes to BIPOC and LMI entrepreneurs? We had done some mapping analytics before, that made us feel confident that we could do this work. We leaned heavily on PolicyMap, which is a mapping and analytics platform that aggregates data from different sources for policymakers. And we also use Python for analysis and Tableau for visualization. And after some exploratory analysis, we landed on these 4 key indicators for community need. So just a warning, this section is a little bit more data heavy. So for folks in the audience, might be less interested in this part. These were the 4 indicators we chose. So that first one, track status, this is your standard LMI indicator through CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, right? This one looks at median family income in census tracts to determine distressed or underserved areas. We knew as a CDFI, we wanted to include LMI here. We also wanted to separate out unemployment rate. So we know this is included with the CRA, and we wanted to use a 1.5 times the national average here as our indicator. And we used data from the American Community Survey, the ACS 5-year estimates, right? And I think that was one internal debate we had using the 1 year versus the more long-term ACS estimates. I see arguments on both sides. You know, building towards an equitable recovery by responding to hard-hit areas means, you know, maybe using those spikes in 2021 or 2022. But I also see how outlier unemployment rates that we saw during the pandemic can make it tricky to compare different geographic areas in Oakland. And so we landed on the 5-year estimates. And then similarly, we wanted to separate out poverty rate, and we used the benchmark of 20% or more in the census tracts. And then finally, we wanted to look at race and ethnicity categories from the census, and we looked at the majority, the highest proportion of the population in that area. I know there's a couple of different ways to look at gender or race and ethnicity, like a diversity index, but we decided to just go with the most straightforward. And one thing we thought about was PCV has an internal custom definition of LMI that we use in our impact tool. And so we wanted to stay true to that and include some of those metrics that you see here. I'll just share another challenge we had was with level of detail. So I'm talking county versus, like, do we use Alameda County versus certain zip codes in Oakland versus census tracts, getting down to block groups. And we landed on census tracts to handle some overlapping neighborhoods in some zip codes in Oakland. But this is something, you know, I'm curious to hear from. This seems like a real group of experts here. So curious to talk about. So using these 4 indicators you see helped us point to 5 neighborhoods that were of highest need. So that's what you see on the right. This is a screenshot from Tableau. This shows East Oakland, Fruitvale, West Oakland, Chinatown, and Temescal. So these were our 5 key neighborhoods, and let's zoom into an example. So here you're looking at a map of Oakland Chinatown. And from the very beginning, we wanted to, I remember that Oakland Chinatown was a focus area of the fund, given the concentration of migrant entrepreneurs and also its location in PCV's backyard. Our office is right in downtown Oakland. But I remember we weren't certain what mapping analytics would show, given that Chinatown is right in downtown, but it definitely was showing high impact. I think we saw a strong case towards including it as one of our key neighborhoods in this place-based fund. So you're looking at a layer of the LMI eligibility. So that deep purple that you see in the box for Chinatown, that shows low income. So definitely high need, considered distressed by the CRA. You see it's 13% unemployment rate. And just as a benchmark, in Alameda County, we saw a 4% median unemployment rate. So just massive. And then 31% poverty, predominantly Asian. And again, tying to one of Bulbul's points in a previous webinar on trust building, I think doing this exercise allowed us to ensure that we had partners that were covering these major neighborhoods. So we didn't have major holes. One of our key partners was the Oakland Chinatown Chamber of Commerce, who we worked with to ensure that entrepreneurs in this area could understand our eligibility requirements, that there weren't, get past language barriers. And so I think it was really a mix of the data side, but also partnership development. And In thinking about Oakland Chinatown, I think we had a couple of recommendations going forward. So one improvement that we have done is, the Oakland Fund is over, but we'd love to expand this place-based work to other areas in California. And so we've done a little bit of target marketing. And one thing we've done to improve this exercise is including a measure of access to capital. So we wanted to look at the presence of other CDFIs in an area. So we're targeting not only high need, but also low access areas. And then one improvement that we have yet to do is incorporating more long-term indicators of impact. I think that a lot of employment statistics, like the unemployment rate, are affected by short-term local migration, things like frictional unemployment. And so including maybe an indicator like persistent poverty or historical redlining could be really powerful here. And this exercise you see here, we did a similar process for determining the other 4 neighborhoods. And we also worked with our community partners behind the scenes to determine our areas of focus. And one thing I'll say, I think while this methodology sounds really technical, really data-driven, we also want to emphasize that we incorporated partnerships and community in this work so that we can include the human side that data often misses. And this is something we wanted to emphasize. It's in our guidebook. And for me, it's thinking about how do we come from a place of yes. This is one of our PCV values that I think a lot about. And for me, data equity is acknowledging that analytics work is often biased by the analyst representation of the world. And so in this analysis, I tried to be aware of how choosing different neighborhoods could bias our eligibility. Something that we included in our guidebook is a resource from We All Count, and that's their data equity framework that I turn to a lot. And I also just want to say, tying back to one of the themes we saw in this webinar series, it was co-creation with our partners, co-creation with previous funders, to ensure that we're truly embedded and designing with an impact-first lens in the community. And for me, this means, first, how do we handle our edge cases? How do we handle those entrepreneurs who might be on the boundary of what we consider our 5 neighborhoods, just so we could just come from a place of yes here. And so what you're looking at here is a rough process of the Oakland Fund. Now, we already spoke about target marketing. So how do we identify our key neighborhoods? Next on that flow is on leads. So first, pipeline management. We got 10.5 million in applications in 3 days. So huge demand here. And we wanted to make sure that we had an efficient process to handle applications. One thing we did was build in a zip code database into our loan applications tool. So credit analysts could easily automatically check if a lead was in one of our targeted areas. And I think this helped speed the process up a lot. The complementary piece was a spatial analysis. So I considered this looking at the radius of a business address to ensure we weren't leaving behind nearby businesses. One example was, I remember there was a loan in East Oakland, and it was right on the boundary of Lake Merritt. So right across from what we considered East Oakland, but really, I think, neighborhoods evolve so much. Freeways often divide neighborhoods. And so we ended up saying yes to that entrepreneur. Another good example is we had a loan right on the boundary of West Oakland. And it turned out that that entrepreneur had multiple locations, one of them being right in West Oakland. And so we ended up saying yes to them as well. And I think as fancy as the methodology sounds, we wanted to include this slide on the human side of this to turn data analytics into a more human-centered approach. I mentioned, neighborhoods can evolve quickly, and I think data can never perfectly capture community need here. And that brings us to my final point, which is on how we're tracking post-closing outcomes of these 37 Oakland borrowers. And here we wanted to talk about how our data warehouse is allowing us to conduct efficient impact measurement. So for me, just want to define data warehouse here as our single source of truth that houses all of our program data in one place. And it's a cloud solution, so it's scalable. And really, it's an entire data stack. So you see at the top here, we use a tool called Matillion, which is an ETL tool, extract, transform, load. This basically automates our data pipeline. Snowflake is our cloud warehouse that I just mentioned. So this houses all the data, and then everything is visualized in Tableau, hosts our dashboards. We can shoot reports to our different directors. This is what you might consider a lean data warehouse. You know, we're a nonprofit with a small data team. And so I think user friendliness was at the top of our priority in determining our modern tech stack. And one of the benefits of this data warehouse is allowing us to track client journeys. So client journeys from baseline to post-closing, including data such as our annual impact survey. And that's some of the key stats that you see here. And we just recently did an analysis looking at a panel data set. So we created a data set following the same 37 borrowers from when they came in at baseline to 2023. And we're really excited with some of the outcomes you see. So 100% of the entrepreneurs said that PCV helped sustain their business. So all of the entrepreneurs said PCV helped sustain their business. This was higher than our overall portfolio. Additionally, 14%, there was a 14% median revenue growth from baseline to 2022. So again, pointing to that long-term wealth building. And then 3/4, 76% created or maintained jobs. So pointing to job creation, job maintenance. We were really excited about these metrics and are continuing to do some post-closing analysis so we can build a narrative of the 37 borrowers as we try to expand this fund across California. And another thing we're doing is continuing to improve our mapping analytics. So I mentioned earlier, one improvement that we're playing with is looking at some long-term indicators of community need. So what you're looking at on the right is an overlay of the historic redlining layer. So University of Richmond published this data set. This is the HOLC, so sort of the infamous homeowners loan corporation, which shows the original redlining grades back in the 30s that loan officers used to determine mortgages. And that red area you can see is what they considered hazardous. 96% of our Oakland Fund recipients were located in either hazardous or definitely declining tracks. This was really, really striking for us. And I think this helps build up the narrative that Catalytic Capital, again, tying to our earlier webinars, that Catalytic Capital in a place-based fund can close gaps. And yeah, we hope we can expand this work across California. And thank you. And with that, I'll pass to Eleanor Bolai, PCV's Associate Director of Corporate and Community Partnerships.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Ken. We hope you enjoyed hearing from our incredible manager of data analytics. And we'd like to give folks some time to drop any questions they have in the chat about the information presented thus far. If we could cue our slides individual, we actually had a question, a clarification on one of the slides for slide 16, please, in regards to the geographic boundaries. And Ken, the question in the chat from Tracy was, could you just speak a bit to what the color coding means here, please?
Yeah, great question, Tracy. Color was just the 5 neighborhoods. Yeah, so you can see orange, East Oakland, red, Fruitvale. I think there's like obvious limitation with this is you see those gray lines, those represent zip code, which we know neighborhoods overlap zip codes. And that's one reason we use census tracts. So if you look closely at the blue, Chinatown isn't up in that area for folks in the Bay Area. Chinatown is right in downtown Oakland. And so, yeah, another limitation of that like level of detail. But yeah, the color is the 5 neighborhoods. Yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you. And if we could go ahead and move back to slide 13. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, which means it's time for us to ask questions of the audience. Oh, we did get one quickly. Ken, this is from Victor. Given that the fund was so oversubscribed and PCV was committed to using relevant selection criteria, what were the characteristics of firms selected versus those turned down?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish I could just share with you our Oakland Fund dashboard in Tableau. And just to start, PCV we're a mission-driven lender, so we don't ask for a minimum credit score, personal or business assets. We don't ask for collateral. And so when I'm thinking about demographics, we track industry, we track time in business, revenue buckets, how many employees you have, use of funds, and also their top focus area when they come to us. And so, yeah, I'd love to look into that and follow up with you. One of the most striking, though, is the 100% BIPOC entrepreneurs of the 37. So we really tried to be mission aligned there.
Awesome. And we also addressed some of these points briefly in the last webinar. So just a hook to feel free to revisit that YouTube as well. We had some great response in the chat, Ken, to this image. And so the first question we would like to ask the audience here, and we say this again, coming from a point of lifelong learning, many of us have moved through various organizations. We'd love to know, when you think about your organization's current data analytics process, where would you map yourself on this chart in terms of no data, descriptive, predictive, or prescriptive? And we're going to ask this question intentionally before we move on to our next set of questions. So if you can drop this in the chat, just so we can get a feel for where you all feel your organization fits on this diagram. And while you go ahead and drop that response in the chat, Sonia, I'm just going to clarify your question there. So the Oakland Fund has closed, but PCV does have lending products for small businesses all over the state of California. So we still offer our standard loan products. It's just that specifically the Oakland Fund itself launched and closed with the uniqueness of what this fund offered. Right, Charles, if we could go ahead and move to the questions, please. And what we'd love to know, the first question of where do you place your organization on the data maturity diagram? We'd also love to know what roles that technology and data analytics play in your work, and how your team is currently utilizing technology to enhance the decision-making process and measure outcomes. Again, if you would drop your response in the chat, and then we'll ask folks to bring their voice into the space live. And our audience seems a bit quiet today. Would people prefer to come off mute to speak their response? Let us know how you'd like to engage, because we learn from hearing your voices.
I'm especially curious from the folks who said 5 in our poll, advanced or most comfortable. If you feel comfortable to share.
Is this a free for all answer session?
Yes, Bendu, please go ahead.
Well, I mean, other than it is important, technology and data analytics, but especially for outreach. We do a lot of outreach. And we have to target our outreach to various communities. And so using technology and data analytics to try to drive our outreach so that we're not just doing basic outreach to the same people, but kind of using it to see how effective we are, and what type of outreach is actually effective, and to what type, and to what community, right? So I think that's one of the roles that it plays. And then as far as decision making and measuring the outcomes, I know there's a Caltrans project. In order for us to even do the outreach, we basically have to do the data analytics in advance, and then give that chart to Caltrans to kind of show, so this is how we're going to do this outreach, because they really want a lot of grassroots, not just your generic, we're sending out emails to everybody, or we're posting on LinkedIn, but actually, where are we being effective? And so that helps us to decide in advance, I mean, once we do that, what type of outreach, and then where, how often, and what mediums to use. So that's one place where it's very, very important.
Yeah, I love that answer. And often it sounds like you're trying to start at the top of that funnel, getting folks in from the very beginning who you most want to serve. We think a lot about that a lot at PCV. We've done some like marketing analytics, looking at engagement or retention, and then most recently, like click-through rate, I think is one. For the Oakland Fund, at least, majority of our applications came from our community partners. And so it's kind of a unique funnel, less focused on like social media or, yeah, those referral channels.
Please go ahead, Ron.
I'm really surprised that a business would get some data together, but not use it. What do you think is the reason for them doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, at PCV, we tell the story about how back in the day, we tried to launch Salesforce at our organization as an org-wide tool. And we had one champion. Often there is a champion who knows the tool the best and tries to like be the evangelist to use it as like a CRM platform. But the problem was that no one else knew Salesforce as well, and they weren't trained properly, and it wasn't really adopted. And so I think one challenge that I really see is user adoption. That's why I'm telling that story. I think you can introduce a new tool like Salesforce or like even a tool like Tableau, but if folks aren't trained, if there's no capacity building, if it's not adopted, I think, you're not going to get anywhere. I think that's why we really pushed for that like 90% active rate that we showed. Right. I think the human side, like often, I think I'm speaking from like a small nonprofit experience. I think the human side of data is often overlooked. Like we call it the human stack, So rather than introducing a new tool, it might be more training or.
I agree with you. And the human side is often not looked at. Yeah, definitely. Well, anyway, I just want to say, since I have the chance, you did a great job.
Oh, thanks, Ronald.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to say, Ken, that's an excellent segue, because some of the questions we've also fielded for your expertise, people would love to know, how does PCV utilize qualitative data to also drive our decision-making?
Yeah, this is a great question. Last month, we had a learning community, a similar webinar, and creating a narrative for entrepreneurs came up a lot. There was a big focus on trying to increase the quality of our qualitative data. And we think about this in two ways. One is how we collect qualitative data, and the second part is analyzing it. So for collecting it in our loan application process, we try to offer free fields to get a sense of our entrepreneur. So what do you hope to use these loan funds for? what's the mission of your business? Why did you start your business? I think that's really important for our credit analysts. And then in the analysis phase, we're working with our friends at Calidris, who are our nonprofit consulting partner led by Sachi Shinoy. And they've developed a tool. They developed a tool that uses AI processing to take different free fields, narrative responses, and try to bucket it for us. We deployed that in our recent Good Jobs Fellows program. So we chose some really high impact entrepreneurs and did some focus groups with them. We're excited to continue to launch that tool.
Thank you, Ken. You must be, foreseeing in advance, because another question we had for you had to do with AI use. For right now, though, Susan, can we go ahead and have you ask your question, please?
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'm curious to hear, I'm sort of surmising, but I'd love to hear from you. It feels like if you're starting a new program and you want to include the data analytics as well as the community engagement and then marry that all to capital structuring, what do you see this as a circular kind of iterative process where you keep going through all these three buckets until you land someplace where you're happy as opposed to linear? Or why don't you just describe how you see that working? Do you see what I'm asking? How you loop them together, like what's been your experience about all that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, is it complementary? You're asking, like, is it complementary or more linear, one at a time, and then?
Yeah. In my mind's eye, it seems like you need to it's iterative, like you keep circling around these things until you land someplace where all of it gels. But I just kind of curious to hear what your experience has been.
Yeah, that's something I think about a lot. So I sit within the Good Jobs Innovation Lab at PCV. We launched last year, and one of our founding diagrams, like if you could encapsulate us into a photo, we have this innovation wheel, we call it. And so it's exactly that. It's an iterative process that goes from how do you collect data, turn it into action, turn it into insights, and then finally act on it, and then come back again and innovate and iterate on that. And so right now, I think Bob Porter spoke about the continuum of capital. So one thing that allowed us to do this fund is having unrestricted grant funding to bring us to 0%. So I think that's one part of the wheel, like he spoke about. And then another part is target marketing. So we were looking at other high need, low access areas in California. We're a California-based lender that can support a future Oakland fund. And so I think that is kind of happening all in tandem. And at the same time, there was a question earlier about how do we collect some of that impact data? And we're continually doing an annual impact survey. So we survey all of our borrowers, ask about how did last year go for you? What's your outlook for the next year? And using their feedback to iterate on our products. So do we offer wraparound, what kind of wraparound support do we offer through our business advising program? So that's kind of another part of that wheel.
I would also just echo, Susan, I really appreciate that question. I sit within our business advising team and our partnerships team at PCV. And one thing I can personally attest to in my time here, when you look at the degree of collaboration between what we call our lending side of the house, our data and lab side of the house, and our BA side of the house, we have clearly started to see the impact of literally our client engagement, client success rates when all of us come together in one PCV for our planning and iteration process. And so we fundamentally believe that it is interwoven and it is this iterative cycle. And it's really exciting to watch how we are growing because of that process. So thank you for that question. Ken, I think we have time for one more expert question to you, if that works.
Mm-hmm.
And you briefly...
Oh, sorry. I thought you were done. No, go ahead.
But no, Bendu, if you have a question, jump in. It's okay.
I do. To do analytics, is it necessary to get anything other than Excel? Like if it's a very small company or a small nonprofit, can we use Excel to do, I know it won't be the same, but is there anything else you would recommend that maybe is not costly for a smaller company?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're asking for like a small nonprofit, for instance, like what
Yeah,
kind
very
of
small
tools should you start
nonprofits.
with?
Right.
Yeah, so I mentioned at the beginning, I think about like mission driven, not necessarily data driven. So what that meant for PCV was for a lot of our founding beginning years, we're using Excel and Microsoft Access as our tech stack. And I think some people like laugh when I share that because it totally worked for us. You know, we were at a point where having a dashboard in Excel, doing small analysis was totally possible for us. And then tying it into, we did have a database using Access where you could write SQL, do basic queries. And I think as our loan pool has scaled, as we've served more entrepreneurs through our business advising program, we just needed more tools and a more powerful approach to storing, housing, ensuring we have like proper data security. Since we are a lender, we collect sensitive information, PII, and then wrapping that all around into the analysis phase. But yeah, I think it totally worked for us. There's a resource, I think it's like Excel Dave that I'm returning to a lot. I mentioned Calidris. They were a big supporter of Excel Dave.
Awesome question, Bendu. Thank you.
Thank you.
And last question for you, Ken. When you think about your key reflections and learnings in helping PCV walk this walk of kind of climbing up that data maturity diagram, what would you say were some of your biggest takeaways in watching this process, or something you would share with other teams looking to undergo similar progress, similar journey?
Yeah, I'm thinking about, so I went to a conference a couple of months ago on Tech for Good, and one of the speakers, Tim Lockey, he has an organization called the Human Stack, and that just related to me so much in this process. Ronald, you asked that great question about how like key challenges, and just to expand on one, that the user adoption was so interesting to me. Like I think I saw a graph recently where it talks about change saturation. So on one axis is time, the other is like difficulty, and I think the takeaway was like, there's a lot of disruption at the beginning of any sort of process when you introduce a new tool, for instance, or like Salesforce, or like a new process, like using Tableau. And so it's a huge disruption in the beginning, but once you can get over that initial peak, then like the implementation, the value like really spikes there, and that can become exponential. And so getting a team across that very first like hurdle is really important. And so at PCV, something we thought about is, first, how do we target like different styles of learning? So with Tableau capacity building, we have a user guide with FAQs. We have like Loom videos that Eleanor and her team has helped us introduce us to. So these are like 3-minute clips. And then we also have done one-on-one trainings with some key stakeholders on accessing Tableau, how to use it. Targeting like different styles, I think has been really helpful.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you not only for that response, but just for sharing your expertise today. We are really, really grateful for our data team. And as hopefully you all can see, it helps us make tremendous strides in our journey here at PCV. Charles, I'm going to turn it over to you for the close.
Great. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Alberto. And thank you, everyone, for joining today. Just a reminder before we go. So today's webinar on impact optimization using data and analytics. This was the third in our series around implementing a place-based loan fund. So if you're interested in the previous 2 webinars, first around how you engage the community in the co-creation of a place-based fund, and then the second one around structuring capital for a fund, please do visit our YouTube page, www.youtube.com/Pacific Community Ventures. Recordings for the previous 2 webinars are there, and the recording of this webinar as well will be saved there. And of course, we'll follow up an email with more details about how you can access those prior webinars. And of course, the place-based guidebook, Playbook, will be launching later on this fall. And of course, we'll follow up with information about that as soon as that goes live. And then finally, just one last reminder, join us. Please do remember to join us on November 11th for an event celebrating PCV's 25 years supporting small businesses. Again, Everything sourced from the event will be from local partners, local entrepreneurs in the Oakland area. So attending the event, you'll really get a sense of the community that we support. And so it should be a great event. Tickets are going to go on sale starting on August 26th. So that's on Saturday. So please do look for details in our upcoming newsletter. And with that, thank you very much, everyone, for attending and being with us today. We really appreciate it.